for
Sorry.
about, about 10 years. More in the last few years. I got into it in part because I am somebody who's short enough that I always have to hem my pants. So learned about needle and thread, and from that point, and then kind of through climate stuff, got into that. And I think what I want for this class, firstly, this is the first time I've done anything like this. So any feedback you have, any questions you have, I'm very interested and open to find out what I can do better, because it is something I really care about and want to do more of, just sharing what I've learned and encouraging people. And the most viral social media post I ever had was a picture of that we'll see later on, of some pants men's that Greenpeace in Germany picked up. And when I translated what they said about it, and they reposted it on Instagram, and I translated it just through Google, and it said something like, even if you are not a skilled craftsperson, you too can try mending. And it just made me so happy that the example that I'm sharing is hopefully that the bar is low, that mending is something that is not, it doesn't have a high point of entry, and it is, you start where you start and you learn as you go, and it can be a success from day one. So that's me and where I'm coming from in this. And then just getting into why we mend, I wanted to just sort of go over what mending is. And the way that I would define it is, it's returning something that has broken or worn to its original functional state, or maybe a little bit better. We mend in part because it's multi-solving. It does a lot of things for us besides just getting us to that original state again. And there's benefits that are not just about, I have an object, the object broke, I have the object again, but it sort of has these cascading benefits. So there's the basics of why mending is great. Just sort of the tangible ones. You save money. The very first things I was mending were wool socks, because I walk for transportation, and sometimes up to 8-10 miles a day, and those wear through fast. So just being able to save, those are, at least then they were like $15 a pair, and I have not bought any in a while because I've just been mending them. But I entered it for financial reasons. But it also, again, the idea that you can take something and make it fit you better. For me, as somebody I'm under 5 feet tall, it's hard for me to always find things off the rack. So just that modification, or the once you find something, being able to hold on to it for longer because it fits, has been part of it for me. We know there's health benefits. We've seen PFAS and different chemicals, flame retardants, things that we don't know what they do, coming through in the clothing stream, as well as allergens. When we are mending what we already have, we've washed it, it's off gas, whatever it's doing, it is often a safer choice than some of what's coming through that's being manufactured so fast. It's efficient, at least in my view, because you're putting time into what works for you, instead of going online and trying to find something else, dealing with returns, dealing with, does this one fit? Even if it's the same item, does it fit the same? It saves time. It's direct. You have an object, you return it to its original state, you're done. And just the idea of self-care, it's something that you're doing for yourself. And it is a really, if we get into the next slide, in the intangible pieces, it is a relationship with yourself. And one of the biggest things that I have noticed, and that I've found in talking to other people about what mending does, is it changes when you're working with clothing and you're working with it for your own body. It changes that relationship with body, and you start to, or at least I've started to really see, it isn't about fitting a body into clothing. It's about making the clothing work for whatever your body is. And I've talked to a number of people, strangers on the street, about when they see me mending. We'll have conversations sometimes. And I've had people talk to me about how they see the brokenness in themselves. And it isn't until they started mending that they realized that if they are willing to fix this thing that tore, why would they not give themselves that same forgiveness, that same space for healing? And the more I've mended, the less I found that I relate my body to what it's supposed to be or what other people's views of it are. The picture shown is the one that was on Greenpeace. So I don't know prior to mending if I would have posted a picture of my rear end to the internet for all to see. But, you know, it's one of the most common mends that people ask about is where our legs rub together, whether we're biking or walking or, you know, so throwing that out there reflects that and reflects that it is, what is it that works? There's also just the sense of accomplishment and pride. We know from a lot of studies about IKEA effect or different things, when we put our time and energy into things, it changes the way we value them and we perceive them. So there is this like ongoing relationship that develops as we mend items. And I've also mended things on an ongoing basis for loved ones. And I find the same thing, that when it returns to me, when they've had another run-in with a fence or whatever it is almost a joy to be able to go, oh, I remember this one that I did, and now there's another layer being added, or, ooh, yeah, that I didn't take that over far enough and it's ripped again. And now I've learned a little bit more about what I need to do to have a mend last longer. It's creative expression. It is a meditation on what it is that we can do, on the tangible aspects of the resources that we use, on the other people who've engaged with them. Sometimes I've mended things from the thrift store and seen other people's mends, and it's not till I'm in there up close with it that I see, oh, that was invisibly mended here, and that person did this, and just that connective aspect, novelty, individuality. My mother was an art teacher, and I do graphic design, and this form of being able to express yourself through something really practical is one of the big draws for me. And the learning aspect, just being able to go, oh, that's why they put that patch in there. That's why there's a gusset. It's just the slow sort of learning through deconstruction and reconstruction, even if it's just the mental piece of like, what is it I need to do here to keep this piece working? I've touched a little bit on how mending is connection and collaboration. One of the best things that I've done for myself is when I remember to mend my socks and my wool socks before I put them away for the summer, I am honestly surprised every year when I pull them out and there they are with maybe colors I didn't remember using. It's like this little present, and the way of planning for our future selves, for caring for our own selves across time as we grow and develop. But also that, again, that connection to the people who made our clothing, whether it is, you know, a grandparent who knit something for us, or workers in countries we may never visit who are doing work that they're not being paid enough for, and you know that we are showing that respect through our mending for the labor that they put into it, the love that goes into mending something for somebody else, something that a piece of clothing that they might associate with different adventures they've been on, and we're keeping it around. It's creating that relationship piece with these objects. It's a social thing. I have done a lot of different mending groups where you're just sitting with people and learning what they do, how they would solve that problem. With this rip, what is their solution? And it is also just the way it connects us across time. Twine, thread, some of these they're some of the oldest objects, the human-made pieces of creating fabric, of sewing things together, of keeping ourselves warm and protected from the elements. It draws us back in time and it pulls us forward in time. And there are birds at least who sew, maybe for different purposes, for nest building, but it is a connective thing. It is this desire to create, to connect, tangibly connecting two pieces that makes us part of everything around us. It's also, you know, around the supply chain, workers, the cross-cultural aspects, but we know the history of a lot of clothing production is very gendered. It is not well compensated. There's racial aspects in terms of the history of cotton harvesting. I mean, cotton is still a very resource intensive crop to grow. When we mend, we reduce the burden on the other people who may not have the same access to rights that we have, who may be in buildings that are not inspected. We're over 10 years past the Rana Plaza collapse. We're a long ways past Triangle Shirtwaist fire, but all of these things are still, we don't have a great record of having mass produced clothing that comes out of people being treated right, people being able to have the kind of creative freedom that I experience when I mend. And so those things are on my mind when I mend, along with the material resources, you know, using wool that's decades old. And I don't know what the sheep who are part of that experienced, or what the farmers who sheared the sheep might have experienced, but it still is that line through, and that respect for the time and energy that was invested, or that came out of the soil and out of the water to make these objects. And we also know how much fast fashion contributes to climate breakdown. We know that we're at 427 parts per million CO2 up. I mean, we're just still rising rapidly. And when we don't produce something new, when we take what's already embodied, the emissions are already in these existing materials, and we use the least resources we can to keep them going, we're protecting ourselves from higher emissions. And one of the biggest things for me is when I mend, I do a lot of advocacy around policy change, and that feels very intangible. Sometimes you think you've made a difference, and then things get rolled back. Lawsuits come up that undermine other things. There isn't the sense of being able to actually do something can be undermined fairly easily. But when you are in a meeting, or when you're in a setting and you're taking something that had a hole in it and sewing it so it no longer has a hole, it is back to being repaired, back to that sort of quasi original state, but maybe even better. For me, it's empowering. It says, and it's empowering in the way that metaphor is. It says, this is something that can happen. Just as I mend this fabric, I will continue showing up. I will continue to try to use my voice in these ways. And it creates hope in situations where I can't tell if my actions have consequences, but I know that I mended this, and I had a conversation with this person who may have shown up to the same meeting and not agreed with me, but we have this in common, that we are humans, that we, you know, use our hands in generative ways, that we want to mend things, that we want to see things get better. So I feel like mending gives us a kind of tangible empowerment to envision that better future when we are facing so much that is really hard to hear, that we're not capable of fully taking in emotionally. So that is my overall spiel for why I mend. Maybe there's some bits in there that resonate with others. And I also mend in a lot of different places. So I am a mend anywhere kind of person. I like to have busy hands. It is, you know, I'm a nail biter if I don't have something else that I'm doing. So this is my way of not biting my nails at the very least. So when you mend anywhere, your kit. Oh, and firstly, just with this, I'd like to introduce the idea of minimum viable product, which I kind of touched on before, but it comes out of UX design. And it's this idea that there's a certain point where what you've created is enough that you can go forward, and you can always iterate, you can always improve. And mending really lends itself to that. Like we'll go through this and sort of define what success is, but there is, when you set yourself, what is the lowest bar which will constitute a success for you, and let it be as low as possible. You're learning as you go. I started with socks, and the nice thing about socks is very few people see them besides me. So the judgment is only coming from myself. Workwear or sports, you know, exercise stuff, pajamas, there's all sorts of things, that underwear that might need mending, and they might not be as visible if you're feeling self-conscious to start out with, and those skills aren't, your skills aren't, and your vision for yourself aren't lining up. So as far as kit goes, you don't need much. What I've pictured here is more than you really need. I generally would say maybe 2 needle types for myself, and that's doing both yarn and thread. I usually carry more because I also have lost and broken more needles than I would like to admit to. The tiny scissors is great, even though you can chew through things sometimes. Getting that nice clean one to easily thread the needle is great. Having your patch materials around on hand. The safety pins are something that I started using probably about 6 years ago, and they've been great for me. They are critical for the way that I mend, because they allow me to sort of bookmark where my mends are needed, so that as I notice holes, I don't necessarily need to get to them. I can put that safety pin in them to find them a little bit more easily. I didn't think I used the embroidery hoop very much, but I was looking back at pictures to pull some for this, and I realized that I did more in the past. So it might be that it was kind of as I was getting used to things, it helped me know how to get my fabric flat. But I don't think it's critical. And the darning egg, the one that's showing is a finial from a curtain rod. You can use like a curved vase. It does not need to be something specific to that set. The thimble, I carry one with, I rarely use it, but I also have poked myself under the fingernails an unpleasant number of times. So it kind of is your pain threshold, your willingness to carry one around, and how easily you use it. The other thing you can do with the thread, there have been times where I've run out of thread and I've literally pulled thread out of the edges of patches. When you're mending, you use pretty short lengths, or you can. And so sometimes the patches can be the source of thread, or hemming a dress, pulling off a little bit of that thread before doing, and then you have the same color as well. It really, really is minimum viable product and minimum materials needed. So when you're picking your project, when you're mending anywhere, I do a lot of mending in meetings, public meetings, committees I've been on, client meetings, on the bus, walking, in parks, just at family gatherings, at parties. There's a little bit of consideration that goes into figuring out what you want to bring with. When you're on the bus and it's a more crowded bus, you're not wanting to do things that are using a lot of arms. And I first learned that doing knitting and crochet, that crochet is a lot smaller of a movement, at least for me, than knitting, that required both arms and a little bit more flopping around. So being able to figure out, is this something that's fairly small and unobtrusive? If there's others around, if their attention might be drawn by it, is it something that I can do that won't look interesting enough to be too distracting if we're sitting in a circle? Or do I have space to spread out? Am I moving around? Am I getting up, moving from table to table for some sort of thing that I want to be able to have it all really contained? Or will I have a table and I'll be sitting there for an hour? And then what kind of attention is required? If you're if you're going and drinking a glass of wine while chatting with friends, I find, that I make more mistakes in that case. So I try to do something that's a little more rote. If it's something that I'm there kind of because I have to be, and some of it's going to be rote for me already, I've seen part of it before, then I might pick something that requires a little bit more thought. So the other pro tip I would have is to save up things with lots of holes for long meetings where you don't want too many items. There's a lot of joy in having the same item and just being able to keep going and without thinking about it. That brings us to the things to avoid. Just keeping in mind that you might be in an indoor space with other people, avoiding things that have musty or strong smells, whether it's detergents or dryer sheets or perfumes, or just, pulling something out of the basement that maybe was a little mildewy. It might be something you're okay with, but keeping in mind other people's allergies and sensitivities. Again, keeping things planned ahead so that if you know that you've got an item that has a lot of patches, you maybe have pre-cut your patches or even pinned them in place before you get there so that you're keeping things as small and in your own sphere as possible. And then just being aware of possible cultural taboos, like not mending socks when, especially in circumstances where people are eating, or avoiding, just being aware of what might impact other people. There's also the aspect of whether or not people know if you're, say, in a setting where you've got a speaker, an instructor. I started off doing origami and some textile things in college and classes, and making sure that the person who is at the front of the room knows that you're paying attention. And I think there's ways to communicate that in your body language, in the questions you ask, just making it extra clear for your respect of them, and also to help guide others who might be slightly distracted by you, that this is, we're not here to watch me mend. We're here because somebody is sharing whatever it is that they've prepared, and I am engaged with it. I've occasionally talked to somebody after just to let them know I personally have ADHD and I focus way better if my hands are busy. So I do make a point of letting people know that this is something that I do in order to pay better attention, in order to be mentally as engaged as possible. I haven't noticed that needs to be the case, but you know, if I'm on the fence, that is something I clarify for people. And it also is something that people will ask about. I've had people borrow needles because they have a rip in the coat that they're wearing. And, you know, I've got something on hand that helps them. I've mended things for other people in a meeting when they, you know, the next one they saw that I had that with and asked if I could do that. I've lent out needles and had them returned, you know, a month later. There's a lot of ways that mending and sewing by hand is still in. We don't see a lot of it, but it's still in us. It's still something that we associate. We've seen other people do. It feels like something a lot of people want to do, and doing it in public invites that conversation and is sort of an invitation to other people to try. And maybe especially if you're, you know, not a skilled craftsperson and it looks approachable. The curiosity is one of my favorite things about it. And then lastly, my favorite state personally is mending and walking. I theorize that this is something that humans have done for a long time. I've only come across a couple of things from old books or that kind of allude to, yes, people do things while they're walking. For me, I was the caretaker for my father for about 10 years as he was aging. And as he moved slower, but before he needed help, I'm a very fast walker by my default. And just to kind of slow myself down, I started doing origami as I walked. And then I started sewing. And so it's at a really slow pace. You can't do them fast together, but you can slowly sew and you can slowly walk. And, you know, as you get better at it, those paces might pick up. I'd recommend starting on smooth pavement without intersections. When you're looking down, at least for me, it is sort of the same angle as checking the sidewalk. So I don't find that with my peripheral vision, I find that it helps me spot obstacles better than when I'm not sewing, when I'm distracted by the birds or other things. That's when I've had more near misses and tripping than looking down with sewing or looking back. And you can also do a lot of things just with enough practice. There'll be that repetition of movement and be able to sort of feel things. So a lot of it is that muscle memory that as you're building it in. The only other piece I would add is you are doing that, or if you are mending in meetings, when you're mending in some setting where you're not choosing the point where it ends, something else might be your bus arrives or the meeting ends. I find it sometimes difficult to keep track of where I put my needle. So I try to fold it to the inside and with as much fabric around it as possible when I put it away. But despite walking and mending, the most times I poke myself is reaching into the bag, forgetting that I did not put the needle back into my little mending kit and stab myself with it. So that is the biggest hazard I've experienced in mending and walking. It's pretty similar to being any kind of detective, I think, or any kind of journalist. It's the who, what, when, where, why kinds of questions. What fabric are we dealing with? What is the wear pattern? What was the source of the wear? Who is the person who's using it? What are they using it for? What are their repetitive movements? It's sometimes you can pick up an object and kind of get a sense based on the wear. Oh, that person carries a purse or a bag that's always rubbing against their right hip. It's probably crossbody. Or there's different clues that you'll pick up over time as you're looking. And those clues will also tell you why the fabric failed to the point that it needs mends. And then it gives you some clues about how you might want to mend it in the future. So some of the examples of where the wear will be are along seams, you know, where things are being pulled, other tension and stretch points from, you know, the elbows, the knees, butt, belly, belt loops, pocket corners, the friction that we might have, the inside thigh of pants, places where zippers catch, where wallets and phones are stored. And then, of course, our collaborators, the lovely moths that are always with us, it seems, the dogs and cats, fences, sharp objects. Every once in a while, I definitely have been trying to cut something else and cut more than I expected. And I am my own collaborator in that case. So those are, when you look through them and sort of think about them, they each have different ways that you might solve them. Like if you take the seam and you just pull it tighter together, you're creating more tension from whatever it was that was pushing it apart. When you have a tension or stretch point, the fabric itself may curve and deform, especially probably both knits and wovens, but you no longer are dealing with a flat plain surface. So that's something to take into consideration, or ways you might want to reinforce and strengthen something if you don't want to be repairing it again super soon. So the ways that the wear will come through: thinning, when you hold the object up to the light, that gives you clues about where you might want to reinforce things. Again, the deforming and stretching, which I think is one of the bits that can make the inner thigh stuff hard to fix, is that you are replacing something that has become curved over time and use with something flat. So thinking through that in order to accommodate curved bodies is a little bit of I found it to be a little bit of a learning curve, but a very satisfying one. Just thinking about when things fray, making sure that you're extending your mend past the fray points so that you're not coming back where it rips just past where you sewed to. I also patch when I have stains sometimes. If there's texture changes like pilling that I don't like, and something that just is covering up something that I personally don't find sightly. I've also had friends do that with logos they don't like, or a t-shirt that's comfortable, but they're not wanting to support whatever the company is. There's a lot of different uses for patching that are not maybe technically mending, but that still are in the spirit of it. And as you're doing this, one of the things to also keep in mind, and I learned this one definitely the hard way, is what will fail next. If you're looking just where that hole is and you're not holding it up to the light or to see, is this also thinning, then you're creating your own short-term repair, which you might want. There's something nice about learning quickly because you didn't think through it. It definitely reinforces some of the lessons. There's also just keeping in mind when you do that repair, it might shift so that a different portion like that is now stronger. So it isn't going to tear, but there might be another point a little further on. It's kind of like physical therapy where it turns out that, you stepped on your foot wrong and it's giving you hip pain on the other side. And all of these bits of the fabric are connected. So it could have unintended consequences. And those are not necessarily bad, but it is something just to consider as you're doing the mends. And then also ways you can improve it. You can mend things, but you can also hack them and modify them and make them, maybe as you're doing this, you wanted pockets in that dress, or you wanted to add, a pocket to an inside pocket to a coat. It doesn't have to end at just getting it back to the object as it was, but what is the way you use something? Is there a place that you find yourself wanting to stick something, or the way it's the number of things that are designed for right-handed people and not for left-handed people is, as I've mended, I think it's jeans, I noticed like the reinforcement of the back pockets seems to prioritize, not every brand, but it prioritizes right-handed people over left-handed people. So there are just ways that we have these biases. We are not building clothes for you. We're building them for, somebody who doesn't exist, theoretical person, and you might need different things, or your loved one that you're working on this for might have different needs. And it is being able to predict, to know somebody well enough to go, oh, I can see kind of you drag your cuff every time and I have reinforced it there, is like a little bit of love that I don't know. It's one of the most, it feels beautiful when I've done it for someone and when I've had it done for me. And then choosing materials. I picked this image in part because there's a doily, which is not known for being airproof. The cold winds still come through there, but I like the look of it. I don't have a lot of use for doilies. I like the softness that it brings, and it allowed me to cover up some of my earlier mends that were a little bit more, they technically kept the breeze from going through, but they did not look good. They were very much the learning curve happening there. When you're darning, if you want to keep things from buckling, you want to keep with no heavier than the weight of the original yarn, or maybe a little lighter, just to keep it from getting, starting to curve and do its own topography. I also would let you know with this sweater, which has a lot of mends, the one pictured, it is heavier than it used to be. I am not minding that, but you know, you're changing the state as you're modifying it, as you're bringing it back to something approaching its original. And that is not bad, but each of these things will have its own consequences. When you're patching, keeping in mind what kind of thickness and weight, how much you're going over so that you don't have fray, what kind of stretch you have. If you haven't worked a lot with fabric, woven fabrics stretch differently if when they're in the grid sort of right orientation versus 45-degree angle orientation. I haven't noticed that for the things I do makes a huge difference, but it is something just to keep in mind that each of these fabrics will do something different. And there is nothing more frustrating than doing a mend and realizing it won't work. Well, I shouldn't say that because you always learned, but there's still a through line of frustration of like, okay, now I'm unpicking my own, you know, seams because it just does not match. It is just too visible for wearing to work, whatever it is. And then if your patch fabric that you've picked will fray, there's a couple of different ways of dealing with that. You can do a little whip stitch around it. If you do a cross pattern sewing it, that will lock it down. You can also, I sometimes use non-biodegradable, like plastic-based glue. There's one specifically anti-fray stuff that's sold in sewing stores designed to sort of lock it in and keep it from fraying. That is another option. And I also would encourage you to break the rules. I mean, it's visible mending, whatever is pulling you forward, what kind of expression you have, why not play with it? And then just thinking through your own goals. Generally, it's repairing damage, but I have a friend who started just doodling little moth trails, and instead of patching the holes, she framed them out and let whatever clothing she was wearing behind the sweater peek through. You might want to be preventing future failure and thinking through that so that you're not mending things as frequently. You might want to improve the item. Or sometimes I honestly have picked out things and used thinner materials because I am curious what it'll look like when I layer it. I like the look of mend after mend after mend and the story that it starts telling. So you might pick a thinner fabric that is set to wear. I did an entire sort of pillowcase in ticking, which is not designed to be washed. And that one gave me a lot of practice in that layering because it was the fabric as it was washed was failing fairly consistently at a rate that was a nice teacher for me. And then for our next one, we've got, you know, just trial and error, measuring twice, cutting once. There's a reason it's an old adage. I have measured once, cut once, and learned why. Most fabric though is fairly forgiving. I would say leather, vinyl, some of those where the holes don't kind of heal are a bit different, but overall, the worst you can do is cut it and have to sew it back together. And we're talking about visible mending. So there is not really a wrong answer, even if some of the first mends I did were on wool sweaters, and I thought it was dryers that shrunk them. I didn't realize it was agitation. So some of those first mended sweaters have become patches for the next sweaters as they shrunk, or mittens. You know, everything is part of that circle of use, the circular economy. As we make mistakes that maybe we can't keep using it in its original form, there are still other uses that we can do. I also, you know, the jacket that you're seeing here, I pulled out of fabric recycling when I was volunteering at the thrift store, and it was stained, and I started covering it up with patches. And it's been an ongoing process that I actually sewed the sleeve closed during a meeting, and it was a long meeting, so it was fairly solidly sewed closed. And it took me a little bit of time to cut it back open to put my arm back in while somebody who had offered me a ride was waiting for me. You know, things happen and you just deal with it, and it's very forgiving. What we're doing when we mend is what humans have done for as long as we've been human. And we just have in this really fast upsurge of fast fashion, of mass produced fashion, of expecting our bodies to match the clothing rather than expecting the clothing to match our bodies. There's things that we haven't kept passing along from one to another, but we're relearning them, and this is how, and there's going to be some hard lessons or some people waiting for us while we quickly take a, seam ripper to the inside of our sleeve. So. And again, minimum viable product. If you're mending your sock, does your toe come through? If it stops coming through, you have mended it. It doesn't matter what it looks like. It might matter to you. And, different people have different levels of what they are okay with feeling on their feet. I'm a bit sensory. I have some sensory sensitivities, and I have not had a problem with my mended things. I thought I might, but for whatever reason, even in the socks and shoes category, my toe doesn't poke out, I am good to go. The breeze doesn't come through, I am warmer, I'm good to go. The success is knowing that you can do it. And it might not, I look back at some of my very first mends, and it's, some of them I like better. There's a level of organic that comes from not knowing what you're doing that you can't replicate when you know better how to do it. You stitch more evenly. You don't have the same sort of rhythm that you did at first. But even in those, one of the best things for me, is the way that it layers over time. And the sweater that I'm wearing is one of those that, I have tried different methods, and then I get into, this method and tried that one for a while. And it is its own geology. There's a layer, and then over time it kind of compresses, and the next layer happens, and you learn by wearing it. And it is, as a person who really loves novelty, it becomes its own novelty. It becomes its own, oh, this looks completely different. And I've looked back at sweaters from my past, and it's just, it's the baby green sweater. It had so few mends when I first got it out from a friend who gave it to me because it had moth holes, and it's a whole different creature, and it's growing with me. Or this jacket was one that my partner, it was his grandfather's, and it came to me to mend with a whole lot of holes, and being able to do that layering and allow it to continue, for maybe more decades, then is part of the joy. And even picking fabrics, going, oh, this came from this pair of pants that was my father's, whatever. We're intertwining stories, and we're intertwining those human relationships. So don't have much to add, except for this is the first time I've done videos like this. So I definitely am very interested to know if there's things that did work or didn't work, or if there's any others. I'd be happy to continue sharing ones to clarify, to whatever might be helpful. I'm going to be mending anyhow, and I can get better at mending on video and describing what I'm doing. So, yeah, thank you for showing up today. And I am curious, any questions or what I can be doing to keep helping.
I enjoyed it immensely. I'm interested in mending. I do mending, but I've done a lot of weaving things, and so it's nice to see. So it's basically anything goes. It's kind of up to your creativity, and so
Yeah.
that's good to know. It gives you a lot more options, and it makes it even fun. I mean, I like that it's that you're saving the items that you're patching and giving it some uniqueness. So beginning, I loved your analogy or whatever about mending the material and mending like relationships, or I mean, it's beautiful. That's really, so you're taking care of yourself while you're taking care of the earth and doing all the, it's all good. But yeah, no, I like that a lot.
Thank you. I'm glad that resonated.
Yeah.
I think I like that you just kind of go for it, and when I've learned mending from my mom, it's like, get the exact thread and the exact color fabric. And the whole point is to not see anything, and you never knew it was there. And I just like, you're just like, and it just becomes like part of your design and the tapestry. So the sweater you're wearing right now, can you show us that? It looks like it's got all kinds of like crazy fun stuff going on here.
It does. It's actually, I worked a lot on it after my father died. It's very fiddly, and it was, the summer after he died, I think it was part of processing for me. It was doing these tiny stitches of, grief, but I've been been in through different things for me. So there's like in this portion, well, there's more holes that need to be fixed, but you know, there's some that are just patched from behind. This is all very tiny Swiss darning. I don't think unless you're processing grief, you know, I can't imagine having the patience for it without whatever it was doing for me. But that it's almost like a rosary, or, you know, the ways that, or walking, or those repetitive motions that somehow are doing something for our brain. So this one, I wore it in part because I was a little nervous doing this, and now it's my comfort sweater with that association.
Oh,
And it's one of the thinner ones, but it started out with the armpit men's. So it's gone through a number of years. At first it was just pajamas because it was some of my earliest men's. And now it does get to go out in public. So
so
But
you actually go and you look for like holy sweaters that you might find, because it seems like that I see more, maybe the most creativity in those sweaters, you know, as being just kind of fun to just kind of do whatever you want, you know.
yeah, it's definitely. I had a friend who was working at a thrift store, and when I was caring for my father, one of the things we did was we'd go to the thrift store and he would start reading, and he was born in 1920. And so spending like $1 for a book, he would just refuse. He'd say, I'm just going to finish it. So we started volunteering there, and seen the kinds of things, really high quality, but with tears that would go into fabric recycling, pulling those out. And that was part of it. It was just like, the quality of the materials has shifted over time, through what you'll see in a thrift store. Older items are often higher quality materials. So pulling those out and being able to repair them, it has been one of the things I've done. And it's also, I have gotten to the point where I feel excited when I discover a new hole, especially when it's a sweater that I'm pretty happy with, and I just have some other ideas to try, but nothing to try them on. So there's a little bit of like waiting for it to wear out, sometimes. So I don't know if most thrift stores, I know that Old School was putting some things that needed mending out, and they'd put little notes on that. I think different thrift stores or different places have played around with it. But I've also had friends, now that they know that I do this, they'll let me know if they have something that has holes, or pass it along. And I ended up with more than I could wear, things not in my size. And the last time I moved, I did a little bit of a garage sale and just put them all out for, I think it was $1 each. Some of the men's, I didn't even finish all of the sweaters, but they went quickly. So there is demand there, but sort of matching up the holy sweaters with the that are, quality materials with the people who are interested in mending them or interested in wearing them is probably still a little bit of a work in progress. But the mobs will help us out if, otherwise. So
when you were talking about the community aspect of things, or the healing, if people would be interested in getting together a small group of people to do men's, whether just for fun or for real, I would join a group like that.
That did sound like a really fun idea. Then you have that time set aside too. And it's social. And, my thing with a bazillion projects I want to do is, well, when I have time, I'll do that, And so this idea of just walking and mending and just wherever, or listening to a speaker or what have you, it's kind of freeing. Like, come on, let's get out of the box here. It doesn't mean you've got everything laid out perfectly in front of you, and you've got, your perfect tools and all that kind of stuff. I have my grandmother's darning thing. What do you just call them? It's just, yeah. But I love that finial concept. It's like, yeah, why not? That's a perfect idea.
That's awesome. I being able to have some of those things passed down is really one of the lovely bits of just, it's such a, I don't know how old the oldest needle is, but the ways that it connects us to the past in those metaphorical and literal ways is really, I just got my aunt's, one of her kids, and it means a lot. And even when it's coming from a thrift store, it is so, there's time. You can only go so fast when you're hand sewing, and that relationship to somebody else's time is really lovely. As far as meeting up, I did talk about that with Carolyn. I have a friend who we both started mending at about the same time, and we've been talking. She's teaches, so we've been talking about doing something in the summer outside, maybe. We are still trying to firm it up, but Carolyn did say that she'd be happy to share that as we figure out the details of that. And yeah, if I haven't thought through pulling something else together in another setting, but I definitely would be interested. And I've seen people do that sometimes around knitting where I bring my mending, or I've seen it happen in breweries, coffee shops. I haven't seen well publicized though, so I'll try to keep an eye out to share and to let you all know if I'm doing any more than the one this summer too. Because it's meant to be shared.
Here's your first group that will attend. No. Yes. Okay, well, we are approaching 7:40 here, but I don't know, just a great discussion and just great energy from all of you being here today. And I think you will all take, whatever, bits and pieces of the technical pieces, but then also just really going back to like, things have stories, we have stories, our clothing has stories, what it says about us, what it says about, our emotions that we're going through. And I think that's just something that I personally never thought about. But I think when we host these mending clinics and other classes, that we really drive that thought, through what we're teaching and why we're doing this, why it's so important. So yeah, there's these extra like lessons and values that come out of fixing things. Like you really don't expect that. Reach out to Reese, Minnesota with any other class ideas or questions, and just keep on mending, fixing your things, have fun with it. It doesn't need to be perfect, and don't let that hold you back.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a great night.